Welcome to the Clean Lakes Alliance Yahara Lakes 101 Science Cafe. I'm Marilyn Gorman from First Weber Group. I've also been a member of the Friends of the Clean Lakes Board and the Executive Board since 2012. Along with hosting sponsor the Edgewater, supporting sponsor Johnson Bank, production partner the University of Wisconsin Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies, and media partner the Isthmus, First Weber is proud to be the presenting sponsor of Yahara Lakes 101 Science Cafe. A few quick announcements. First, if you haven't become a member of Friends of Clean Lakes, please do. If you like these talks, a $35 annual donation will allow you to attend all of them for free, which is a $110 value. Second, we are getting ready for Frozen Assets, and we are looking for volunteers to help with this huge event here at the Edgewater. The dates are February 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. If you'd like to help us outside on the frozen Lake Mendota, with this free community-wide event that draws over 6,000 people, please see somebody from the Clean Lakes Alliance after this talk. This morning, we're going to learn more about nutrient management plans. These plans allow farmers to precisely plan and track nutrient use and prevent nutrient loss when manure goes on the fields. It's good for them and really good for our lakes. Now I'd like to introduce Adam Sodersten from the Clean Lakes Alliance to tell us more about today's speaker presenting this interesting topic.
Thanks, Marilee. Good morning, everybody. How are you? Everybody have coffee and rolls and everything and enjoying the last little bit of summer. Hey, real quick, want to thank Marilee, and then Marty Stroud is in the room. Bob Weber, I didn't see if he came in. First Weber does these introductions for us, and in addition to that, are a fantastic sponsor of Clean Lakes Alliance, and they've been for a long time. So really, without First Weber's help, we couldn't be doing these really cool talks that a lot of you come to. So thank you so much to them. So this morning, Sara Walling is joining us, and she is the Chief Nutrient Management and Water Quality. She is the Chief of Nutrient Management and the Water Quality Section at the Wisconsin Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection. That is a big title and a long business card. In this role, Sara directs the department's soil and water conservation programs and regulations, including current revisions to the new producer-led watershed protection grant program and the Wisconsin Manure Management Advisory System's runoff risk advisory forecast. And as we know, runoff is the #1 cause of phosphorus going into the lakes. 1 pound of phosphorus, 500 pounds of algae, so controlling that runoff is a big deal. Sara actively represents the department on national, regional, and state technical and policy committees related to non-point pollution reduction programs, strategy, and policy development, including adaptive management, nutrient trading, and related topics. Would you please join me in welcoming Sara Walling?
Can everyone hear me okay with my mic? Great. Well, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. I'm very happy to be here to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart and my career for the last 10 years. And I want to explain a little bit about what I do and how we feel that the work that we're doing at the department with all of our partners and the counties and the farm groups are working together to try to fight off some of the issues related to nutrient runoff and the quality of our lakes. So first, though, a little bit about me. We are stuck. So just to give a little bit of background on who I am, I think that helps to kind of set the stage for the talk that I'm giving today. I've been a Madison resident for only about 12 years or so. My husband is native to Fitchburg, and so he grew up surrounded by the lakes and spent a lot of time with his family on the water. And the water and the lakes is one of the things that drew us back to Madison to live here for the last 10 or 11 years and raise our children here. I've been at the department ever since we moved back in 2006 in a number of different capacities. So initially I was a nutrient management specialist, and then I moved on and did some policy work on bioenergy with a secretary's office, and now I'm back leading the section that I was a part of. We've been doing this work for a long time, and it's been very exciting over the last decade to watch the progress that we've made. It's important to kind of step back and give the agricultural story of Wisconsin, because I think it also helps us set the stage for why we need to work so closely with agricultural producers to have a common goal of runoff reduction and pollution reduction, so that we're working together and recognizing the importance of what they do, the importance to the economy and the way of life of Wisconsin, and also how we can help on the environmental side to try to reduce the impacts of the work that they're doing. So we do have, these are 2015 statistics, but we haven't gotten 16 numbers in just yet, but we have nearly 70,000 farms, 300 of which are those CAFO farms that you are probably familiar with the term for, those largest farms that are over 1,000 animal units. So there's a lot of farms that the DNR, the 300, that DNR has very direct purview and enforcement regulatory authority over. There's also a big number of farms that they don't, that have that strict permitting requirements associated with. So we have a lot of farms that fall underneath our purview and the non-point programs, and work with the counties on a lot of incentive-based processes to help them improve their environmental footprint. We have 9,500 dairy farms that produce about 14% of our nation's milk, and then we are first in the nation for a number of crops. So not just our milk and dairy-related items, but also cranberry production and snapping, vegetable crops like that. A lot of cattle in the state. This is something you guys have attended some of these talks have probably heard a lot about. We have a lot of cattle, which makes a lot of manure. We also have a lot of cropland, but not compared to a lot of our other neighboring agricultural states of Iowa, Nebraska, etc. So we're working off of a land base with a lot of animals, a lot of nutrients that we want to be able to utilize and not just dispose of. But we're also restricted because of the type of geography and landscape that we have in Wisconsin. Compared to our surrounding states, we have some of the most diverse geography. We have everything from your central sands, which has its own sets of concerns over water quantity, and really sandy soils, obviously, that have a lot of potential for that nitrogen to leach down, and so groundwater concerns there, to the geography and geology of the Northeast, where you have a lot of karst, and you've probably heard a lot of the news headlines about things going on in Kewaunee County and concerns up there for groundwater quality. And then you move that all the way over to the driftless area, where you have a lot of very hilly terrain, a lot of streams, a lot of agriculture, and a lot of cows, and a really very, very different landscape with which those farmers need to manage compared to the flatlands and clay soils in the Northeast and those sandy soils in the central sands. So because of that, I think we are really unique in Wisconsin and having to deal with a number of different challenges that some of our neighboring states who have a more homogeneous agriculture really don't need to. All right, Teresa, I think I have a...
Interesting.
Thank you. I could just use the buttons too, so sorry about that. Okay, while she's getting it loaded though. So what I'm really here to talk about though is the main thing that we do in my department, and my 3 nutrient management specialists focus the majority of their time on, and that's nutrient management planning. And this term means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So one of the goals I have here today is for you all to remember that DACCAP stands for Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. That's an acronym that I throw around all the time, and most people look at me like they have no idea what I'm talking about. So from now on, one of my goals is that all of you will know what DACCAP is. The other one is to understand what nutrient management really is in the eyes of us as regulatory agencies and farmers and agronomists that work for the farmers to help develop these plans, and how important they are and the tool that they can be to improving water quality. So nutrient management planning is one of our state performance standards. The DNR sets performance standards for our state. It is just one of many. So this is the long list of kind of the base agricultural performance standards that all farms in the state need to comply with. So everything from not exceeding your soil erosion rates under tolerable soil loss levels to our nutrient management planning, which is number 2 on the list. And then just a lot of ones that honestly sound a lot like common sense, but are keeping the cattle out of having to completely free access to the streams. Making sure that when you build a manure storage pit on your farm, that you're doing it to certain technical specifications, those kind of things. So there is a certain base of operations we work from. DNR sets those performance standards. And then we have a partnership with DNR at DATCAP where we go in then and make those kind of overarching performance standards, like everyone has to have a nutrient management plan. We come in and say, what does that nutrient management plan have to include? All the really very specific details of what that means. So it is not just knowing where I'm putting my commercial fertilizer and manure. That tends to be sort of a common misperception that this plan is really just a checkbook of where I'm going to put my manure on this field this year, with how much commercial fertilizer I'm buying and where I'm putting it. The nutrient management plan is really much more than that. It's intended to manage lots of components of how that farmer is managing their crop system. Managing both the source, so if it's commercial fertilizer or manure, which type of manure, which type of commercial fertilizer, how much you're putting on, what time of year you're putting that on, and then where you're placing it in relationship to the crop that you're trying to grow. A concept you might have heard in one of the previous Yahara 101 talks, but called the 4 R's. And it's the right time, right place, right method. It's that mentality of ensuring that all of those components are working together in this system-based approach. By doing so, you do have the ability to provide a greater protection for water quality and reduce the risks of nutrient losses from the fields that you're applying those fertilizers, because you're taking into consideration so many things. And that's what I'm going to walk through with you guys today. Excuse me. So as I said, for our purposes, we put in a ton of specifics. So yes, everyone has to have a nutrient management plan. Well, what does that mean? These are a couple codes. So there has to be some bureaucracy built into this talk. And these are the administrative codes which govern all these details. These are the things that says that you shall, you must, you may at times. So there are some flexibilities in certain components of it. But without these constructs, there wouldn't be that set of things to compare and contrast against to make sure this farmer, this operation are doing a good job. So ACAP 50 and NRCS 590 standard are two things you're going to hear from me quite a bit today. So all nutrient management plans have to follow these two aspects. I'll get into a little more detail what that means soon. It also means all of your fields and all of your pastures. It's not just a piecemeal approach to dealing with maybe just those fields that you're applying manure on. It's the whole crop system. It's also what you own and what you rent. So it's the operated acres as well as what we're pulling in. It needs to include every single component of nutrients that you use. So if you have manure, and maybe you're lucky enough you don't have to buy commercial fertilizer and that supplies 100% of your nutrients, but otherwise you're pulling in any of those other commercial fertilizers you're buying from the co-op. You're also taking into consideration credits. So a number of nitrogen-fixing crops, alfalfa, soybeans, produce their own nitrogen and provide a nitrogen credit for the following year's crop. Those need to be pulled in so that you're not over-applying nitrogen and are using what those plants are providing naturally first before adding more nutrients, manure, or commercial fertilizer. We also have requirements on who gets to write these plans. Farmers can write their own nutrient management plans. One of the main ways that they do that is I have 3 staff. They provide support in regions statewide, and they go out and do an intensive amount of farmer training every fall, winter, late winter, early spring. And they help farmers write their own nutrient management plans by going through one of these classes. Dane County offers this class on an annual basis so that farmers can write their own plans and kind of continue to come in on an annual basis and update those plans as needed. It's been a big driver for our program over the last 6 or 7 years. It also needs to have soil tests. So you measure to manage, just with a mentality that we have. If you don't know what's in your soil right now, as far as phosphorus is concerned especially, then you really don't have a good base of operations to start from as to know how much you need to follow that so that your crops can thrive while also maintaining environmental protection. We also have caps on how much fertilizer. So it isn't just an open book. You can't just apply till you have your manure gone or until your fertilizer is used up for that year. There are ceilings on that through the UW Fertilizer Recommendations. And then I think most importantly that the nutrient management plans pull in are setbacks and other restrictions associated with sensitive features. And one of the comments that we've often gotten is that the 590 nutrient management standard is statewide. Well, it is. It's one rule, one code, one standard that applies to all farms. This is a picture of what the front page looks like. But it's also Wisconsin specific. So there's a national 590 standard that NRCS puts out. And then every so often, and we just went through this process of updating ours in 2000, well, it took about 2.5 years, but we finished in about 2015. And we tweaked and turned and ratcheted down some of the aspects of what requirements there are associated with this. But the important part about the 590 standard from my standpoint is that it's specific to every farm. And that if your farm doesn't have sandy soils, then the restrictions associated with applying manure on sandy soils simply don't apply to you. However, if you're up in an area that has a lot of sinkholes in the karst area and the driftless area, then there's going to be certain restrictions that are going to apply to what you're doing on your farm. But as far as being statewide, absolutely it is. But the specifics and the unique characteristics on your farm are going to dictate the restrictions and allowances really too that you're able to have because of the operation that you maintain. So there's a bunch of things that are required. There's a few things that are good considerations, like try not to apply manure when it's actively raining would be a good one, right? So there's some of the common sense things built into it too. But it's important to recognize that there are very specific restrictions that are going to apply, and that's why it's so important and one of the reasons why we love to do farmer training, because farmers understand what their fields look like and what some of those features are, and then we're able to talk to them on a one-on-one basis to really understand how those features play into non-point pollution potential from their facilities. So this is what the UW Fertilizer Recommendations look like. It's a book that was put out. This one is in 12, it was 2006 before that. And what it does is it looks through, and it's basing how much nitrogen and phosphorus you're putting on a crop, not just based on how many bushels the farmer would like to try to grow this year. It's not optimizing that. Instead, it's trying to optimize the amount of nitrogen that you're applying based on the potential of the soil type that you're growing it on. So certain soil types are going to be more productive than others. Those soils you're going to be allowed to put a little more nitrogen on because the soil and the crop grown there can attenuate that and use it better and make it into the growing crop that you can then harvest. Other areas of the state simply don't have as productive soils, and they're going to have lower nitrogen amounts that they're able to apply. So we do put a number of ceilings on the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that can be applied based on the crop, based on the location, the soil type, and the climate associated with it, those type of features. It's one thing I always like to point out because there tends to be a myth out there that nutrient management planning lets you put on as much as you need to make your crop grow as best as it can, and there is some checks and balances associated with it. So, getting to the point, how can nutrient management help us improve our water quality? Well, we have one thing I guess we're very lucky to have in our state, I feel, is a computer program called SNAP Plus. It's the way that 99% of the nutrient management plans are written in our state. My staff is also technical support for this. It's a software program that is free, available through our amazing UW Soil Science Department. Laura Ward-Good has been the brains behind that for many, many years. And it's a computer program as you'd expect. I kind of liken it sometimes to like a TurboTax. It's intended to be somewhat of an intuitive way for you to catalog out everything you're doing on your farm. One of the ways it does that is through maps. So without understanding where you are in the landscape and what your individual features on your farm might be and how that plays into potential losses of nutrients and water quality impacts is hugely important. Maps are a great way to demonstrate that and a great way to figure out where these spots are. So this is an example of a map from an actual nutrient management plan that we reviewed this year for our quality assurance program. And it's showing you a number of different things. So then again, this gets to that farm-specific features. So this is an image that is showing you these dots. So in the middle there, you can see a little icon. It's supposed to look like a water well. That's what those two are. So those are showing you drinking water wells. These are showing you grassed waterways. And those need to be marked because there's certain specific restrictions associated with what you can and can't do around those. So that circle is showing a 200-foot zone around that drinking water well. There are restrictions. Within 50 feet, you're not applying anything. And within 200 feet in the winter, you have to incorporate anything. All right? Well, you have to incorporate anything in that 200 foot so that it's not running off directly to that drinking water well. You also have to not apply manure or other nutrients to those grassed waterways, because that's where the water that is being shed from those fields is coming and concentrating and moving its way off the field. So we put those in grass to keep the soil there, as well as to trap some of the nutrients in the water that might be escaping from the field during rainfall events. So that's an example of how we mark some of those in a nutrient management plan. Additionally, it's able to demonstrate and show you where obviously you have fields that are close enough to water that you have to play into, that other considerations play in. So if you have one of these areas, this is showing you another acronym, Surface Water Quality Management Areas. We call them SWCMAs. You might hear about that sometimes, but that's showing, so this is a stream, obviously, and our requirements are within 300 feet of there, there's absolutely no nutrients being applied in the winter. And then there's other limits on rates even during the growing season, so you can't apply as much manure in those areas as you can in upland areas that are farther away, for obvious reasons, right? The closer you are to the stream, the more likely it is that anything that runs off there is going to make its way to that water system and eventually out of the stream and to its receiving waters. In this case, this pic from this farm actually is the Yahara chain of lakes. We're also looking at things like nitrogen vulnerability. So we care a lot about surface water with our Yahara lakes with phosphorus. That's the concerns that we have as it related to phosphorus, and it's 1 pound capacity to generate a lot of algae. But we also care a lot about drinking water and nitrogen issues and making sure that nitrogen stays and is utilized by the crop instead of heading to the groundwater. So we have a set of soils that we have identified through the state that are especially likely to leach nitrogen. So those really sandy soils up in the central sands, not a ton of them around here. But there's also nitrogen restrictions if you're shallow to the groundwater or shallow to bedrock. So there's restrictions on how much you can apply, when you can apply it. So we're always trying to encourage more use of fertilizer applications closer to when those plants are actually there and able to take them up. But those are also things, and that's what you're seeing in the yellow lines. Those are all different soil types. And you can see that both of these fields, to some extent, especially this field, are pretty highly impacted by that soil type, and so certain restrictions apply there. But would not apply. In fact, these are those fields that I had in the previous slide. There's no nitrogen-restricted soils up there. So those farmers are actually having to kind of weigh these things out and understand that they can do certain things in those north side fields that they can't do on the south side of that road. So how can this help? Well, one of the analogies I like to draw for people is that I really think that nutrient management plans are much like the way that I look at my family's budget. If I don't take the time to sit down and figure out how much I'm spending on entertainment, how much I'm spending on the kids' sports, how much we're spending on our vacations and household, needs, how can I have a good understanding of where I have the opportunity to maybe expand my expenditures on vacations or where I need to pull back and really, make sure that I'm not going out to eat as often as I am. That's what nutrient management planning can do for farmers. If you don't start with this base of operations, it's going to be really difficult to figure out where they need to tweak their system to reduce soil loss, to reduce phosphorus and nitrogen losses. So it's not so much that nutrient management planning on its own is the silver bullet to providing water quality improvement, but it's really a base that you have to build off of. And so that's where we often, that's where we need to start, and then the tweaks can happen from there. So this is a couple of pictures of what Snap Plus looks like when you start using it. So this is one of the pages, and it's the field screen. And you can tell by when you start kind of piecing through some of these columns, these are the names of the fields on this farm. And you work through, and it tells you the size, where we are. These are the soil types and the slopes, how steep and how long those slopes draw. Those all play into a couple things I'll get to in a minute. How close you are to water, and what the slope is between the edge of that field and the water. And then is there any restrictions associated with it? So does that SWCMA, that surface water quality management area, intersect with some part of that field? Is part of that field one of these nitrogen restricted soils? So all that's popping in here. All of this stuff, much like TurboTax, we try as best we can to make it as user-friendly as we can, and so there's a lot of things you can import directly into this, and it fills a lot of this for you. You go to that map and you draw your field boundaries, and it's already picking out which soil types those need to be. So it's filling in a lot of that for the farmer, for the agronomist, so that there's less user error in making decisions and choices that way. But all this information is extremely important, and it's all built into Snap Plus, because then you end up needing to go through and say, okay, so now I know where these fields are. Now what am I growing on them? We don't care about just this year, we care about every year. We don't want you to just plan for last year and this coming year. We want you to look 4 or 5 years in the future to be able to make sure that the decisions you're making now aren't going to have negative ramifications on your crop management system later on. Not just for the environment, of course, but also for their bottom line. They want to make sure that they have enough corn silage to feed their cattle, enough alfalfa in their rations. So they need to make sure they're making enough acres of each of those each year moving forward to make sure that they can feed their cows the way they need to. At the same time, however, we're making them take a closer look at how what their crop is, what their yield expectation is on that soil type, how they're tilling that field. This pulls in the soil test information, so it knows how much phosphorus is already in that soil, how much potassium is there. And then you go through and you can add how much manure, nutrients, or fertilizer am I using. So there's a separate screener they go in and they say, yep, I've got 15 tons of dairy manure from my cattle, or from my calf pens, excuse me. I'm gonna apply that this year. It knows how much nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium's in that much manure, and it does the calculation for you to say, okay, if I apply it at that rate, here's how many pounds of nitrogen that manure is providing. Here's how many pounds of phosphorus that manure is providing. And then you're able to make up the difference with any commercial fertilizer if you need to. So this is your checkbook, your calculator for your family budget of where am I spending, what do I need, how much do I have, am I over or am I under? So a negative sign, not always that good because you might be starving your crop a little bit of necessary nutrients, but also extremely important to know if you are over. Now what you're seeing here is a lot of nice colors. So this looks like a pretty decent plan. There's some little wiggle room with some of these because we know that some of the numbers are not always entirely accurate. Not every pound of manure is going to have exactly that much NP and K, so we give a little bit of latitude, but what you will see is some of these numbers on the side. It takes all of those, all that input, all those pieces of information I just went through, the cropping system, over not just 1 year, but up to 8 years worth of its rotation. How much fertilizer, how much manure, how I'm tilling it. And in the background, Snap Plus's amazingly big brain is back there churning and doing the phosphorus index calculations, the Russell II soil loss calculations for the farm, for each field over that duration. So it's a separate calculation for every field to tell us, here's the amount of soil loss in tons per acre per year that this actual crop system from 2015 for 3 years is going to expect to erode on an annual basis. This number is how much is technically allowed. The reason we have a t-value for every field is that's the rate that our NRCS soil scientists think that the soil is able to kind of regenerate. As long as you don't erode past that amount, then you're able to remain productive. Now, that's sort of a productivity-related factor, granted, but it is a ceiling that is also incorporated in there. Now, you can see from this example, this field is well under that, and that's something we like to see. A lot of the phosphorus that we see getting to our lakes isn't just, it's coming off not just from the manure that's being shed during runoff events, but also the phosphorus that likes to stick to those soil particles and comes off when the soil erodes and gets into the streams. And then importantly, I think you guys have heard about it, but the average phosphorus index. So that's a calculation that looks at, okay, we know there's a certain amount of erosion happening from that field. We know there's a little bit of soluble phosphorus that's coming off the manure or other things too. What's the chance that that phosphorus is making it to the nearest water body to actually make that water quality impact? And that's what the phosphorus index is. It's a delivery factor. So it's a model that's taken into consideration, again, all those factors of my crop management system, but saying this is what we expect, how much phosphorus is going to be shed from this field on an average basis. And it's a good way for us to get a calibration sort of how well or not this field is working environmentally for reducing non-point losses. It also looks at things like what's the chances that I'm increasing my soil test phosphorus. The more soil test phosphorus we have in that field, the more likely it is that anything that does slough off during one of those intense rain events that you get a gully washer from, that there's phosphorus coming off with it. So we don't want to see farmers raising their soil test phosphorus levels to extremely high levels. Corn really only needs about 35 parts per million phosphorus in the soil, and it could grow quite well for several years off of it. So we know we want to make sure that this number is always 0, negative, somewhere around there, unless it's a really deficient soil type. And it all kind of comes back around. I showed you that picture a couple of slides ago. This is a nice blue. It looks all calm and happy. This is a good field. There's nothing that it's in trouble for. But this one, I had to make an example, actually, of, yeah.
So, back up a slide, can you talk about that? Or maybe you will be talking about the P2O5 balance target.
Yes.
Can you talk about what happens when the soil test P is greater than 50?
So we have some limits. There's a number of very detailed, specific restrictions that I'm not going into today. Your eyes would glaze over. But I did want to give you enough specifics to let you know, obviously, how much detail farmers and their agronomists enter into when they go into this nutrient management plan thing. It's not just a easily broad brush, attempt at putting out their crop management checkbook. But again, with this balance number, what we're trying to make sure of is that's 0 or negative, because if it's negative, it's showing a downward trend in soil phosphorus levels. And you can expect that over time, then, with this crop management system that this person has of growing corn, grain, and soybeans, and then say, several years of alfalfa as your normal dairy rotation, that over that course of that rotation, you are going to be drawing down the soil test phosphorus level. Not by 101. There's a factor that you have to multiply that by to get at what you think it might reduce by over time, but that's an important goal number, and one that most farmers, when we work with them, want both of these things to work out. They want to be underneath their phosphorus index levels that they have to be, but they also want the soil test phosphorus level to not be increasing. There are, which is kind of surprising to some people given how much phosphorus concern we have with our situation of our lakes, but there's a lot of places in the state that are still phosphorus deficient and actually do need phosphorus fertilizer or through manure to increase their soil test phosphorus levels to a more sustainable point. So that's what that phosphorus P2O5 balance is. Farmers care a lot about the K2O too, because it has no environmental concern for us as far as water quality or soil health goes, but it's extremely important to crop productivity. So that's a number that they like to keep an eye on as well. So with this one, this is what a field would look like when we first sit down with a farmer, walk through what they're currently doing. They've never had a nutrient management plan before, haven't soil tested. We put in all their information as if they were just going to continue to do what they're doing. So this is what he expects to do on this field, for instance. I have to say though, this was one I made up just for illustrative purposes, but this is what he wants to do on this field over the course of these 4 years. If he does it all as is, puts on the manure that he thinks he's going to, the fertilizer he normally would, tills it the way he normally would, this is what it would look like. And you can tell nobody likes to see red on most things, and this one is right there with it. Anytime you have red showing on here, that's showing that you're over. So this field is over applying its nitrogen by quite a bit, 197 pounds in that first year, continues to do so over these ones, and it's showing the farmer or planner where we're making those kind of bad decisions, where we're putting on too much in this case. And so then you can more easily go back to those fields, figure out, okay, that was clearly too much. Well, I don't need that much fertilizer. That's usually the first thing we end up finding, and it makes farmers' day. Every time we have one of these training sessions and they go through and they look at this, and they're like, yep, that's how much, this is probably an exaggeration, but that's how much I'm putting on, that's how much I've been buying and putting on these fields. That costs them money. They have their manure, obviously, too, and they want to use that first, but they're making decisions based on what they think they need or what their dad used to always put on and those kind of things. But this is pointing out how much extra fertilizer they're buying. And so we're able to work through the calculation to figure out how much less they need to buy to be able to still make a productive crop system. So our goal is always to take a look then at what they're growing, either the rotation they have, so they can adjust that, maybe try to put some alfalfa in there. Maybe try not to have it back-to-back, corn, soybean rotation as much. They can obviously pull back on the amount of fertilizer that they're adding. This is also showing based on the tillage. So this guy's going to go in and chisel plow it, no disc, at every spring. That's their plan. That's what they've always done. By doing that, you can see on this field, granted it's kind of steep slope, silt loam, but that is way, way over what their allowable tolerable soil loss level would be. Again, showing up in red to make sure that they see and can adjust what they're doing because of that. So take a look at this and you go, okay, well this person's been doing this for a long time, right? We want to be able to work through some options with them about what can they do, what are they comfortable with doing. As with anybody, you go see your financial planner and they tell you, you have not enough money for retirement. Well, I can't make more money if I don't have any more money to put in but maybe I need to make choices. Where can I pull back so that I can put more money into my retirement? The same mentality kind of happens with something like this. So we go through and look at various things. So this is a scenario of a couple of these same sidebars on that last screen, but with different scenarios of, okay, here's that initial spring tillage. I'm not doing it on the contour. So on the contour means if you're going up and down the hill, because the slope, like when you're going up and down the hill, that is definitely not on the contour. Instead, what we're trying to do is when you see those pretty pictures of the strips, that's another conservation practice, but we want everybody at least plowing along the slope like that instead of up and down the hill. Just having that action, those plow lines that develop when you till that way, create surface roughness so that anything that is trying to move down that hill slope gets caught at some of those rougher spots where the plow line went this way instead. So it does catch a fair amount, and that can reduce your soil erosion rate by up to 40% right off the bat if you just stop going up and down the hill. Luckily, especially over the last 10 years since I've been doing this, we see a whole lot less of that, and more often than not, farmers, this is an easy go-to to just be able to orient their equipment a little differently. So you can see in this case, though, what that did. The only thing I changed here was that I'm doing it on the contour. That average soil loss went from almost 12 tons per acre per year to a little over 7. Still not in the ballpark of this. You can also see, though, that phosphorus index value went from a 21, 6 is the acceptable number in that case. It went down to 14. And then if you do another level of contour, so you did on the contour, and you incorporate an edge of field buffer, so there's a requirement how wide that has to be, what the vegetation has to be, but if you include that as well, it further drops your phosphorus index. Doesn't do much to your soil loss though, right? Because you're not really dealing with anything besides still just plowing on the contour in that field, but by having that edge of field buffer, you're able to trap a lot of the runoff and the nutrients that would have been moving off the field in that buffer strip. So that combined number is showing you, yep, that's what's happening in your field. Still not looking very good, but here's what you're getting. That's your soil loss in that vegetated strip. So it's kind of showing you can run different scenarios. What this isn't showing you different scenarios of is if you just change this crop rotation. Instead of putting corn soybeans on that field, maybe move the corn soybeans to a flatter area and instead put this one into alfalfa for a few years. You've got a perennial crop on there then for a number of years, which has a significant ability to reduce erosion because one, you're not tilling it every year, and two, you've got a plant that's out there year-round, and so the erosion rate and the erosion potential is a lot less in those situations. So, importantly, who has to do this? Well, our rules are that all farms have to have a nutrient management plan, but, so there's always a but, right? So this one is all farms, and that means not just livestock. So a lot of people have a misconception that nutrient management planning is not for me if I don't have any animals, if I don't deal in manure. If I'm just corn soybean guy down in Walworth County, I don't need one of these, right? Not true. All farmers are supposed to have a nutrient management plan. Of course, those that are the largest farms, those CAFO farms that have a DNR WPDS permit, of course have to have a nutrient management plan. They don't get cost sharing, they don't get anything else, they just have to do it. There's a number of folks, I think almost all of our 72 counties now have a manure storage ordinance. So if you do intend to have a manure storage pit to hold some of your manure for some time of the year, you've got to have a nutrient management plan that goes with that, that shows that I have enough land, that the situation and the way I'm going to apply this manure over my rotation meets all these requirements so that I'm going to have this big pond worth of manure and I know where it's going to go and I'm going to put it out there and then environmentally protective way as much as possible. The other way is through cost sharing for manure storage. We have a cost share program, which I'll get a little more into too, at our state that we facilitate through the counties, and then some counties have their own cost share programs to some extent too. Also, if you're participating in the Farmland Preservation Program, which I'll go into a little more detail on, but that's a statewide program that allows individuals, landowners, so not just farmers, but anyone who owns agricultural land, to get an income tax credit every year as long as they meet the soil and water conservation standards, nutrient management being one of them. And then of course, if a farm does something wrong or something happens and they have a discharge from their facility, then those farms can be required to have a nutrient management plan, again, without any cost sharing. So, as I started with, all farms are supposed to have one of these, but we can't, at the state, require a farm to have, and to force them to have a nutrient management plan unless we can provide them with 70% cost sharing to develop that plan. And that's where a lot of our job at DAPCAP comes into. We get an annual allocation from the legislature it tends to be, this is where I'm headed, it tends to be about it's been about $1.7 million every year that we have at our department. And then we allocate that out to each county. Each county applies to us every year and says, here's how much we think we want and we can spend, and then we make some decisions about that based on their need, how much acreage they have, if they've been able to show that they can spend it in previous years. Of course, we don't want that money to go to waste, so we want to make sure that the counties that are getting it have places they can cost share with farmers. But that's how we work. So I have a staff of 3, and we work with the counties. So our counties are our boots on the ground, and we have one of the closest relationships, or try to maintain those with our counties as much as possible, because they're the facilitators of this program for us. They get the money, they get, say, their $80,000 a year, and then it's their job at the Dane County Land Conservation Office to go and work with the farmers, identify who needs the cost sharing to develop one of these nature management plans, and then they have a contract with that farmer to get that done. They come back in, they have a cost share contract, and they get paid. The rate currently has been $7 per acre per year for 4 years. Don't ask me where the 4 years came from, really. That was well before my time. That was a statutory legislative aspect. But the way that we actually end up handling it is the farmer will get one chunk payment right up front. So it's $7 per acre per year for 4 years, which translates to $28 an acre. So $28 an acre for every acre of cropland that has a nature management plan within their plan. So it can amount to a fairly sizable amount of money, as you'd imagine. As I mentioned before, this 590 standard that kind of includes all these musts, shalls, mays, coulds, we just revised that in 2015. And we ratcheted down on a number of things. We ratcheted down on some of the groundwater protections, so we actually reduced, I guess you'd say, some of the amounts of manure that farmers are able to apply in some of these restricted areas, in attempts both to increase the groundwater and surface water protections that it provides. Doing so, and then sort of just keeping up with the times and the cost of soil sampling and things, we increased that rate to $10 per acre per year. So that started in 2018, when our rule finally makes it through the legislature in the next few months. That'll be when this $10 per acre per rate happens. So our average farm tends to be, statewide, our average farm is about 200 acres. And so, you can do 200 times 10 is a pretty sizable check that they get up front. Another way, and now I want to show this, bringing it down to home. So this is what Dane County has received and spent over the years. The reason why the spent is so much lower is that a lot of times planning happens in the winter. That's also when the change of the fiscal year happens and the money that we've put out the door. So they're extending a lot of that money into the following year. So the contracts are almost always higher than they're spent. But you can see that there's been a sizable amount of money that has been put toward this county and statewide over the last few years. This is what the Dane County Farmland Preservation Program looks like for Dane County. So anywhere in green has county zoning for agriculture. So that means that anybody who has agricultural land in any of these green areas can collect $7.50 per acre per year through their income tax submission every April, and receive $7.50 an acre every year for having a nutrient management plan, following the other state performance standards, and keeping their land in agriculture. The other areas, these yellow, orangish ones, our agricultural enterprise areas, and that's where farmers have come together and said, we want to maintain agriculture in these areas. It's important to us. We want the ag infrastructure, we want the implement dealers, we want the co-ops to stay there, we want to keep our land maintained in agriculture. So they have gone to form an AEA, and you can see the one up here in Windsor. All these dots are individual farmland agreements that those farmers have signed to say, yep, we're going to stay in agriculture for at least 15 years, and they get the tax credit as well at some slightly different rates depending on if it's just an agreement. If you're green and yellow overlapping, you actually go up to $10 per acre per year. This amounts to a lot of, this is for Dane County, of course, this is $1.68 million in 2015 on over 230,000 acres that was claimed on. This pool of money for farmland preservation amounts to about $15–16 million statewide that goes out the door for farmers to comply. So it's another added incentive for them to work within the system and try to reduce their non-point. This is how we collect information about nutrient management. Our department's responsible for figuring out how much nutrient management planning is happening out there in the world. So you take a look at your plan every year, you write it initially, take a look, did it change much? If it did, am I still complying? Did my alfalfa die off too early and I need to move into corn too soon? They can make changes to make sure they're still complying. And then they submit this annually to Kyle at the Dane County Land Conservation Department, and then he lets us know how many of these he got, and we count them up. And this is what it looks like statewide. So this is when I came to the department in 2006. We had a very, very small budget. We had less than $500,000 that we were giving out for nutrient management cost sharing. We didn't train farmers how to do their own, so it was just agronomists writing plans for folks at the time. Over the years, this is a graph showing from 2006 through 2016 how much nutrient management planning we recorded and is reported to us each year. The different colors show the different programs and the reason why a farmer has that nutrient management plan. So this darkest color on the bottom is because of those manure storage ordinances, and so they have to have a plan, or livestock siting permits, and they have to have a plan. The next lighter orange up there is our CAFO acres of nutrient management planning. That's a little bit of a, there's probably more acres in that category. It's just that it's difficult to assign those to a given county and things at times, and those acres tend to come in and out of their plans. So we think that's more, but these are what we have actual documentation to record through these checklists. The next lightest one on there actually is our DAPCAP Farmland Preservation Program. So that's how many acres we've added in, where on the checklist they've indicated they have this plan because of farmland preservation or because of the cost share dollars that we provide to the counties and then they provide to the farmers. The next one up is DNR does have a little bit of cost share dollars, and NRCS over the years has had, so they do cost sharing through their EQIP program too, directly with NRCS. Those acres have declined for a number of reasons. There's been a little less interest in going through the nutrient management through NRCS, but also that whole FOIA, Privacy Act thing tells the NRCS they can't actually share that information with us, and so these are based on the ones that the farmers themselves are indicating that they did this plan because of an NRCS cost share. And then the last one, the green on top, is those plans that are in there because they just want to do that. The farmers are voluntarily doing it, no other programmatic reason for it. This is how it looks statewide. The point of this map is the darker the color, the better. That's more acreage of their counties that are covered by nutrient management plans. With all that dairy that we do have up in the Northeast, they are working very hard to make nutrient management planning a 100% reality up there. Various percentages around. Dane County's at about the 37% right now. We're just pulling in those numbers from the 2017 crop year, and that number has gone up. But we don't know for sure. We're still pulling in some of the numbers, so I didn't want to give too much of a preview on that. But this is how Dane County's nutrient management planning has gone over the years. So again, based on the same program colors, you can see this is since 2002, however, so it goes back quite a few years compared. But there's been a very steady increase, and we're right around that 45%. I think it's going to be a little higher though, but I felt comfortable with telling you at least 45, so it has gone up about 7% at least since last year. So why does anyone want this? Well, there's obviously these financial incentives But there's also, and we see this on a routine basis with the training that we do with farmers directly, is that they see almost always some immediate financial benefit of having these the day that they make that plan. They're able to identify where they are putting commercial fertilizer that they didn't need before. They're figuring out where they can move their manure to different places that often provide more flexibility and sometimes actually can reduce the hauling costs of moving the manure, where they're putting it in places that really doesn't need it as much. And we went through one of the brochures that was on our desk as you checked in, was one of our attempts to kind of demonstrate to a lot of the other producers in the state why this is a benefit to them. And so working with a few of the farms that we have done training with, Weinberg's is one, they really saw a ton of benefit and were willing to step up and let us talk about their story of why they have nutrient management for their farm and how it benefited them. So it can save them money. It also demonstrates an intent by that farm to comply with the requirements for our state. So should one of those catastrophic events happen, they apply manure today, 2 days later, we get one of these downpours that are becoming more and more regular around here, and a lot of that comes off the field and there's a fish kill. Well, they're still responsible. They still have repercussions with the DNR. However, if they have a nutrient management plan that can show that they were doing the right thing based on the requirements that we have, that does carry some weight when it comes to the potential for enforcement. So that's helpful. These plans can also help them better identify where these conservation practices work. You've been hearing a lot about Yahara Pride. They're doing a lot of really innovative and fun conservation best management practice installations. By using this plan, again, you're able to get that base of operations. Where is the cover crop most needed? Where are my most eroding fields? Where can I put that cover crop? Maybe I don't need it on 100% of my farm, but if I get these, 50% of these fields, you're actually getting more bang for the buck, if you will, for those practices. So again, nutrient management plans are an assessment tool. They aren't really a silver bullet to fixing this water quality problem, but by having one, you don't necessarily reduce the water quality impacts, but without one, it's pretty much impossible, in my opinion, to really be able to understand where on your farm you can be installing those conservation practices to expect to get the best impact on water quality. And by assessing that current condition, they're able to better target those efforts so that they're putting their effort and their energy and the financial supports from the organizations like Clean Lakes and the work that they've been doing at Yahara to even just where they're putting their own time on their farms, and everybody likes that. So with that, I think we do have hopefully a few more minutes for questions. Thank you very much.